In a continuation of the Lockheed Bribery scandal tale, and despite Lockheed having secured a significant number of highly profitable and influential sales contracts through its various means, 1971 would see the company face the possibility of total collapse, thus bringing its finances under scrutiny for the first time, and thereby revealing the extent to which one of America's leading defense contractors had bribed its products into the ranks of nations across the globe, sparking international condemnation. By 1971, while Lockheed was a dominant figure of the global defense sector, the company was facing near-total collapse due to the development of the L-1011 Tristar, together with various other military project cancellations, both of these factors having brought the company's finances to a precarious position. With creditors demanding repayments that couldn't be made, and with no immediate prospects of a turnaround, Lockheed, as the largest defense contractor in the United States at the time, employing tens of thousands of workers and sporting military contracts that included the C-130 Hercules and the C-5 Galaxy, appeared to be on the brink of bankruptcy itself, a critical matter for American national security. As its financial crisis deepened, Lockheed's executives appealed to the U.S. government for assistance, arguing that the company was too vital to the national economy and defense sector to be allowed to fail, and that without intervention, they warned that the United States risked losing a major aerospace manufacturer with ripple effects that would extend far beyond Lockheed itself. However, their request for government support was met with resistance from lawmakers and financial analysts, who contended that Lockheed's current fiscal situation was the result of poor management and miscalculated business decisions, and that bailing out the company would set a dangerous precedent, encouraging other corporations to expect government intervention when facing cash flow crises. Opponents of the bailout also feared that such an action would distort free market competition, giving Lockheed an unfair advantage over other aerospace firms. But despite these objections, the Nixon administration ultimately determined that the risk of allowing Lockheed to fail outweighed the consequences of a bailout. As such, in May 1971, President Richard Nixon introduced a bill titled the Emergency Loan Guarantee Act to Congress, seeking a $250 million loan guarantee to support Lockheed and its L-1011 Tristar program, the proposal sparking fierce debate within the Senate regarding the aforementioned precedent of government intervention in private enterprise and whether taxpayers should be responsible for rescuing a commercial company. Leading the opposition was Senator William Proxmire of Wisconsin, who criticized Lockheed's financial mismanagement and argued that a bailout would unfairly shield the company from the consequences of its own poor business decisions, while Senator Alan Cranston suggested that any government assistance should be on the condition that Lockheed's senior management stepped down, warning that rewarding corporate inefficiency could spark a trend of complacency within American industry. Critics of the bill pointed to the recent bankruptcy of the Penn Central Railroad in June 1970, another major corporation that had foundered due to mismanagement and the outcomes of a shambolic merger, contending that Lockheed should be treated no differently, especially given that the Tristar was a commercial aircraft rather than a military project. Furthermore, the provision of the bailout was also considered to distort competition in the aviation sector against the likes of McDonnell Douglas and General Electric, both of whom were involved in the production of the DC-10, and thus strongly opposed the measure, while Admiral Hyman G. Rickover denounced the proposal, arguing that it was an example of the system shielding private firms from the risks typically associated with free market capitalism. The bill, however, did have prominent support, who countered that government involvement in the industry was not new, and that financial assistance had long been a feature of major defense and aerospace programs, with Treasury Secretary John Connolly testifying in favor of the bill, highlighting the fragile state of the American economy in the early 1970s and the widespread job losses that would follow if Lockheed were allowed to collapse. Nevertheless, the controversial proposal was debated for several months before finally being put to a vote on August 2, 1971, with Vice President Spiro Agnew casting the tie-breaking vote in favor of the loan guarantee, with President Nixon signing the act into law a week later on August 9th, and the media quickly dubbing the act as the Lockheed loan. The loan, which eventually amounted to $1.4 billion, was finally repaid by Lockheed in 1977, along with approximately $112.22 million in loan guarantee fees, with October 14th of that year seeing Lockheed and its 24 lending banks voluntarily terminate the government guarantee, entering into a private credit agreement that provided the company with a $100 million revolving line of credit. This arrangement allowed Lockheed to retire $60 million in outstanding debt, helping to stabilize its financial position, while on the same day, the Emergency Loan Guarantee Board approved a termination agreement, officially ending government involvement in Lockheed's finances. However, the loan, which was to be Lockheed's savior, also exposed its darkest secret, as by subjecting Lockheed to an unprecedented level of government scrutiny, the conditions attached to the loan guarantee led to the exposure of a vast and deeply entrenched global bribery network. Investigations into the company's financial records revealed a pattern of illicit payments made to foreign officials, intermediaries, and political figures across multiple countries, exposing Lockheed's reliance on bribery as a key strategy for securing international contracts, with the terms of the loan guarantee agreement imposing strict oversight on Lockheed's financial operations. In exchange for government support, the company was required to submit to rigorous financial reviews and open its books to government auditors, which included the placement of government-appointed representatives on Lockheed's board of directors, a measure designed to ensure responsible use of taxpayer funds and prevent further financial mismanagement. This level of scrutiny was unprecedented for Lockheed, who had previously operated with significant autonomy, particularly in its dealings abroad, and although Lockheed's leadership was reluctant to accept such conditions, the company had no viable alternative, as securing the loan guarantee was essential for its survival. As government auditors and financial investigators began to examine Lockheed's records, they identified discrepancies that raised immediate concerns, with large sums of money being transferred to consultants and intermediaries in foreign countries, often with little to no documentation explaining the nature of the services provided. Many of the recipients were individuals with no apparent expertise in aerospace, but held close ties to foreign governments, military procurement officials, and high-ranking political leaders. These transactions, which have been categorized as routine business expenses, being eventually revealed to be part of a widespread bribery operation aimed at securing lucrative aircraft contracts in various nations. One of the most significant discoveries emerged in Japan, where Lockheed had funneled millions of dollars to Yoshio Kodama, a well-connected political fixer with deep ties to both the Japanese government and organized crime syndicates, with Lockheed's financial records indicating that these payments had been made under the guise of consulting fees, but further investigation uncovered their true purpose. Japan was not the only country where Lockheed's bribery practices were uncovered, as in West Germany, financial investigators traced substantial payments made to Defense Minister Franz Josef Strauss, a key figure in the German government's decision to procure the F-104 Starfighter, while in the Netherlands, investigators discovered that Prince Bernhard, a senior member of the Royal Dutch family, had accepted bribes in exchange for his support of Lockheed's military aircraft sales to the Royal Dutch Air Force. As the company's financial difficulties deepened and government oversight increased, certain employees began to question the ethical implications of Lockheed's business practices, with several whistleblowers emerging who were uneasy with the company's routine use of bribery to secure contracts. The timing of the scandal's emergence further heightened its impact, as with the Watergate affair still fresh in the minds of the American public, trust in government institutions was already at a low point, to which Lockheed's bribery revelations added to the growing disillusionment with corporate and political leadership. It was this pervasive skepticism of corrupt international business practices that led to the formation of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations, chaired by Idaho Senator Frank Church, which initially set out to examine the overseas business practices of American corporations, focusing primarily on Lockheed. The origins of the subcommittee were rooted in the wider Watergate scandal itself, when during the Senate Select Committee, widespread corruption within the highest levels of the U.S. government was exposed that implicated key officials in unethical and illegal activities designed to consolidate political power, revealing that the administration had systematically misused public responsibility and trust, employing covert and illicit methods to maintain its hold on power. Central to the scandal was the funding of Nixon's re-election campaign, which relied heavily on contributions from U.S. corporations, with executives being approached with requests to donate $100,000 to ensure continued favor with the government. These contributions, though often framed as voluntary, being orchestrated with a level of discretion designed to obscure their true nature. Nixon's re-election campaign benefited enormously from these concealed corporate contributions, but the corporations themselves also reaped rewards, with many business leaders seeing these payments as a means of influencing government policy, ensuring favorable treatment, and securing contracts, while the American government itself profited indirectly from these arrangements, particularly through arms sales and military contracts that were facilitated by kickbacks and bribes. By mid-1975, the scope of investigations into corporate misconduct in the United States had expanded beyond the realm of domestic campaign financing to encompass international business dealings, with the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations focusing initially on the Northrop Corporation's alleged bribery activities in foreign markets, particularly the Middle East. However, testimony from Northrop executives in June 1975 revealed an unexpected link to another major defense contractor, with executives admitting that Northrop had modeled its practices on those of Lockheed, a revelation that immediately drew attention to Lockheed's own business transactions, particularly in Japan. On August 15, 1975, 6 months after the first indications of corruption had surfaced, Senator Church formally escalated the matter by writing to William Proxmire, chairman of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, requesting his cooperation, with Church stating that the subcommittee had come across Lockheed's questionable foreign activities in early June while investigating Northrop, leading to the issuance of subpoenas and the submission of a substantial number of documents. By August 27th, Church had also reached out to the president of the Export-Import Bank, demanding the submission of all documents related to Lockheed's aircraft exports, this being of particular significance in the wake of the Emergency Loan Guarantee Act of 1971, as it became evident that Lockheed had used part of this taxpayer-backed assistance to finance illicit payments to foreign officials. These revelations angered regulatory bodies, including the U.S. Treasury Department and the Senate Banking Committee, which viewed the misuse of federal funds as an egregious abuse of public trust, while Proxmire, in a letter to Treasury Secretary William Simon, stressed that the most effective way to halt such corrupt practices was to disclose the name of foreign officials and intermediaries who had received payments from Lockheed. The revelations sent shockwaves through Lockheed's leadership, exposing the company to intense scrutiny, with late August 1975 seeing Robert N. Waters, Lockheed's vice president and treasurer, commit suicide by firearm shortly after ELGP officials visited Lockheed's California headquarters to review financial records. Meanwhile, the US government remained divided over whether to publicly disclose the names of foreign officials implicated in the scandal, with some policymakers believing that full transparency was necessary to hold those responsible accountable, while others feared that exposing high-ranking officials in allied nations could lead to diplomatic fallout and jeopardize key international relationships. Initially, the Church Committee had focused its inquiry on bribery cases in Europe and the Middle East. However, in November 1975, new information emerged that dramatically shifted the direction of the investigation when Jack Blum, a key investigator for the committee, was informed while in West Germany that the most significant bribery case was in Japan. Until that moment, many of the documents relating to Lockheed's dealings in Japan had remained untranslated and were therefore not fully analyzed. But once these records were examined in English, the committee was astonished to discover that Lockheed's key intermediary in Japan was Yoshi Okadama, a war criminal and notorious figure in Japan's political and criminal establishment. The revelation that Lockheed had enlisted Kodama as a primary intermediary in Japan stunned the Church Committee, as unlike bribery cases in less developed nations, where payments were often directed at mid-level government officials, Lockheed's payments in Japan had reached the highest echelons of government, with Prime Minister Tanaka himself being identified as one of the key recipients of Lockheed's illicit payments. Faced with the potential fallout from the investigation, Lockheed sought to mitigate the damage by appealing directly to the American government, with November 19, 1975, seeing Lockheed's legal representatives, Rogers and Wells, write to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, warning that exposing the identities of foreign officials involved in bribery could have severe diplomatic consequences. 9 days later, Kissinger himself wrote to the U.S. Attorney General, urging caution in making the findings public, while Lockheed's legal team also attempted to exert direct influence over the Church Committee, with lawyers from Rogers and Wells meeting with Senator Church and the committee's chief counsel, Jerry Levinson, attempting to persuade them to limit the investigation to bribery cases in the Middle East. Levinson appeared receptive to the idea, but Blum insisted that the evidence relating to Japan was far too significant to ignore, and after an intense internal debate, Church ultimately sided with Blum, ensuring that the investigation into Lockheed's activities in Japan would proceed, the implications of Blum having lost this argument meaning the Lockheed scandal might never have fully emerged in Japan. In early 1976, the bribery scandal began to unravel when the Senate Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations released documents revealing that Lockheed had paid $24.4 million in secret payments to facilitate aircraft sales to various foreign governments. This news provoking international outrage as evidence of widespread corruption involving high-ranking officials in multiple countries came to light. Under mounting pressure from investigators, A. Karl Koshan, president of Lockheed since 1967 and vice chairman, as well as one of the central figures in the scandal, admitted to the scheme, claiming that beyond the 16 individuals already arrested by Japanese authorities, an additional 7 politicians, including a potential future prime minister, were involved in the scandal. He revealed that of the $12 million Lockheed had allocated to securing the Tristar deal with All Nippon Airways, only $3.4 million had been categorized as legitimate sales commissions, while the remaining $8.6 million had been paid as bribed, $4.3 million of which to Yoshio Kodama for retainer and consulting fees, and another $4.3 million directly to Kakue Tanaka and other politicians. Koshan also admitted that Lockheed had deliberately spread a false rumor in Japan that the Nixon administration was pressuring Japanese airlines to purchase Lockheed aircraft in an effort to boost sales. In a book based on 100 hours of interviews with Yoshio Murakami, a journalist for Asahi Shimbun, Koshan alleged that Kenji Osano, a powerful transport executive and close political ally of Tanaka, had accepted a $1.6 million bribe to lobby on Lockheed's behalf, though Osano denied any involvement when questioned before the Japanese parliament. Koshan further claimed that Kodama had leveraged his influence with Yasuhiro Nakasone, then Minister of International Trade and Industry, to advance Lockheed's interest, with Nakasone, a prominent figure within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and a leading candidate for the prime ministership, denying any connection to the scandal. Koshan also implicated Suzumu Nikaido, the chief cabinet secretary during the Tanaka administration, stating that he had accepted a $50,000 bribe, along with 3 other politicians who had influence over Japan's aviation sector. But like the others accused, Nikaido denied ever receiving money from Lockheed. As investigations intensified, the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations issued a subpoena in March 1976 to Robert Hack, Lockheed's president, demanding all records related to the company's payments in Japan and correspondence regarding Lockheed's sales of F-104 Starfighter aircraft to Turkey. The subcommittee acted after concluding that the U.S. government was not moving quickly enough to disclose the names of Japanese officials who had been bribed, the U.S. State Department resisting calls to release the names, citing concerns over U.S.-Japanese diplomatic relations, but later agreed to provide the information to Japanese authorities in stages. A bilateral agreement was signed between the U.S. Department of Justice and its Japanese counterpart, stipulating that Japan could begin receiving the names of implicated individuals, but these names would not be publicly disclosed unless formal legal proceedings were initiated. The scandal extended far beyond Japan, with similar allegations emerging in Turkey and Italy, with early March 1976 seeing General Amin Abkaya, the former chief of the Turkish Air Force, resigned from his post after an official inquiry revealed that Lockheed had bribed Turkish officials to secure aircraft sales, while later that month, Turkish authorities announced that Abkaya would stand trial in April on charges of falsifying official documents. Meanwhile, in Italy, former Defense Minister Mario Tanasi was officially named as a suspect in the Lockheed Bribery investigation, with Magistrate Ilario Matella informing Tanasi that he was under investigation, and the case was referred to the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry, as required by Italian law for former government ministers. In December 1976, Koshan attempted to justify the company's actions in a manuscript for a forthcoming book, asserting that the bribes Lockheed paid in Japan had not been proactively offered by the company, but were instead solicited by Japanese officials, his account directly contradicting the widely held belief in Japan that Lockheed had aggressively pursued bribery to secure contracts. With bribery having been discovered to be an endemic part of international business for American corporations, with William Proxmire suggesting that the Departments of State and Defense had tacitly encouraged such practices through tolerance of misusing agents' fees, thus leading to his crusade to curb these corrupt practices through new legislation and consequences for violators. Initially, the Proxmire Bill, numbered S-3133, sought to amend the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934, proposing that issuers of securities registered under Section 12 of the Act be required to maintain and furnish reports detailing foreign payments, while making it a criminal offence for corporations to make or accept foreign political contributions. A key provision of the bill required public disclosure through periodic reports detailing any payments exceeding $1,000, including the purpose of the payment and the identity of the recipient, thus eliminating ambiguity regarding what payments should be reported and to provide legal certainty for enforcement authorities. However, the SEC, while supporting the bill's underlying objective of a remedial legislation, was hesitant to adopt specific accounting and disclosure requirements, preferring instead to use its existing regulatory authority to introduce reporting obligations rather than enforce criminal penalties, while fearing that setting a fixed financial threshold for disclosures would inadvertently create a loophole, allowing corporations to justify payments below the threshold as immaterial. During the administration of President Gerald Ford, March 1976 would see him establish a 10-member cabinet-level task force on questionable payments abroad to conduct a full-scale investigation into corporate bribery, framing public disclosure as a necessary step to curtail such practices and prevent their recurrence. However, critics, including Proxmire, viewed the task force as a political maneuver designed to delay decisive action, while parallel to Proxmire's efforts, Senator Church emerged as a leading advocate for fighting international corruption, proposing his own Church Bill No. S3379 in May 1976, which sought to impose stricter disclosure requirements on corporate financial activities. Despite its comprehensive approach, the Church Bill was ultimately rejected by the Senate, with critics arguing that it was overly ambitious and not carefully tailored to address specific problems, while industry representatives feared that requiring extensive disclosures would burden corporations with excessive regulatory compliance. In May 1976, the SEC itself introduced its own legislative proposal under number S3418, or the SEC Bill, which focused specifically on the establishment and maintenance of adequate accounting books and records, as well as internal control systems, framing its recommendations as a solution that appropriately addressed the problem, arguing that it provided a measured and practical approach to corporate financial oversight. However, Senator Proxmire strongly disagreed, asserting that the SEC bill was the weakest of all proposals introduced to the Senate, noting that no external witnesses had been called to testify in support of it, aside from SEC commissioners and its chairman, while unlike the Proxmire and Church bills, which had sought mandatory public disclosure of questionable foreign payments to protect investors, the SEC's proposals discarded this requirement. Instead, it maintained that enforcement should rely on the Commission's existing authority, rather than forcing companies to disclose more than what was deemed material under prevailing financial reporting standards, and while the SEC viewed the issue as serious and widespread, it did not consider it to be an inherent defect of the economic system. With the SEC bill failing to gain approval in the Senate, Proxmire introduced a new legislative proposal in June 1976, known as S3664 or the Second Proxmire Bill, this bill being a compromise, incorporating elements from the Proxmire, Church and SEC bills, with one of its most significant concessions being the removal of the mandatory disclosure provision, a decision Proxmire opposed, but accepted in order to advance the legislation. Proxmire sought to strengthen the Second Proxmire Bill by incorporating an amendment proposed by Senator Church, which would introduce public disclosure and reporting requirements related to payments made to foreign governments, political contributions and gifts, Church arguing that these reporting requirements were the essential enforcement mechanism that would ensure the bill was effective. Despite Proxmire and Church's efforts, the amendment faced significant opposition, and when it was debated in September 1976, representatives from the Department of State, the SEC, and various senators, including Senator Percy, objected to its inclusion, citing procedural concerns over the lack of hearings held on the proposed changes. Ultimately, the Second Proxmire Bill was passed by the Senate without the Church amendment, but the bill failed in the House of Representatives due to the adjournment of Congress before further action could be taken, though in 1977 it was reintroduced to the Senate and House of Representatives under designation S305. In December 1977, President Jimmy Carter signed S305 into law as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA, which marked the culmination of years of legislative effort to address corporate bribery and financial mismanagement, though its final form reflected the web of compromises, with its accounting provisions merely reinforcing existing regulations under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. The FCPA was ultimately shaped more by political expediency than by a comprehensive effort to address systemic corruption, as while the Watergate scandal had created an opportunity for meaningful reform, vested interests, including the SEC, corporate lobbyists, and elements within Congress, ensured that only incremental changes were enacted. Despite initial resistance, the FCPA gradually became a model of international anti-corruption efforts, with 1998 seeing the law amended to align with the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, extending its jurisdiction to cover foreign persons and companies engaged in bribery within US territory, while several landmark cases demonstrated the far-reaching implications of the FCPA. In 2008, for instance, Siemens paid an $800 million penalty after admitting to engaging in widespread bribery across multiple countries, while in 2014, Alstom settled for $772 million after being implicated in a corruption scandal involving officials in Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. In the immediate aftermath of the Lockheed Bribery scandal and the Subcommittee, major changes within Lockheed itself were prompted, with March 1976 seeing Koshan and Daniel Che Horton, Lockheed's chairman, forced to resign, while in July 1977, new allegations emerged that Lockheed Shipbuilding and Construction Company had significantly overcharged the U.S. Navy for steel used in the construction of amphibious transport ships, with a government investigation finding that Lockheed had billed the government for enough steel to build 12 ships, despite only delivering 7. In his later years, Koshan withdrew from public life, spending his time managing an alfalfa farm in California and engaging in charitable work, eventually passing away at the age of 94 on December 14, 2008, though to the end he remained unapologetic about his actions, maintaining that his primary responsibility had been to Lockheed's employees and shareholders. In Japan, the revelation of the scandal caused an immediate public outcry, intensifying calls for transparency and accountability, with Prime Minister Takeo Miki pushing a resolution through the Japanese parliament requesting the US Senate provide all relevant documents concerning the bribery allegations, though Henry Kissinger sought to withhold certain details from the Japanese government, arguing that full disclosure could harm US-Japanese diplomatic relations and national security cooperation. On February 24, 1976, in the first major domestic investigation of the case, Japanese police and tax officials raided the offices and homes of executives linked to Lockheed, including those of the Marubeni Trading Company and the residence of Yoshio Kodama. These raids involving 380 officers and focused on allegations of tax evasion, violations of foreign exchange regulations, and bribery of senior government officials. Public anger intensified as evidence of corruption mounted, with the Japanese parliament passing a resolution urging the US government to disclose all documents related to the case, arguing that a full investigation was crucial for maintaining trust between the two nations, resulting ultimately in the arrest of Tanaka on July 27, 1976, on initial charges of violating foreign exchange laws by failing to declare the payments he had received, before being released in August on a 200 million yen bond. The case against Tanaka escalated further on August 16, 1976, when he was formally indicted for accepting bribes from Lockheed through Marubeni executives, with prosecutors alleging in August 1972, shortly after assuming office, Tanaka had met with Marubeni executives at his private residence, where they requested he use his influence to ensure ANA purchased Lockheed's L-1011 aircraft. In return, they promised to pay him $1.6 million in cash, delivered in 4 installments between August 1973 and March 1974, with the indictment also implicating Hiroshi Hiyama, former chairman of Marubeni, along with former Marubeni executives Toshihara Okobo and Hiroshi Aito, all of whom were charged with facilitating the bribes. Despite denying the accusations, his arrest threw Japan's political landscape into turmoil, and he was forced to resign from the Liberal Democratic Party and relinquish his leadership of a powerful intra-party faction, while Prime Minister Miki, who had allowed the investigation to proceed, faced severe backlash from within his own party, leading to deep divisions. Despite his legal troubles, Tanaka remained an influential figure in Japanese politics, with his faction continuing to expand, reaching over 150 members by 1981, representing more than one-third of the Liberal Democratic Party's total strength in Parliament, while his supporters viewed the case as a politically motivated attack orchestrated by American corporate and political interests, particularly given his tough stance in trade negotiations with the United States. Tanaka's trial reached its conclusion on October 12, 1983, when he was found guilty of bribery and sentenced to 4 years in prison, along with a fine of 500 million yen, but rather than accepting the court's decision, he filed an appeal and insisted he would not step down from Parliament as long as his constituents continued to support him. His refusal to resign exacerbated political tensions, leading to the dissolution of Parliament and the so-called second Lockheed election in December 1983, with Tanaka securing re-election with a record-breaking number of votes, reaffirming his enduring political influence, though the LDC suffered significant electoral losses, prompting Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone to announce a commitment to distancing the party from Tanaka and introducing a new code of ethics. Throughout the 1980s, Tanaka remained politically active until a series of strokes forced him to resign in October 1989 after a 42-year career, Tanaka eventually passing away on December 16, 1993 at the age of 75 due to complications from pneumonia. However, more shocking than Tanaka's arrest and trial was the attempted retribution against Yoshio Kodama on March 23, 1976, when Mitsuyasu Meino, a pornographic actor and right-wing ultranationalist, flew a plane into the side of Kodama's house in Tokyo in an attempted assassination, adding a further layer of tragedy to the wider scandal. The 29-year-old Meino had long been an admirer of Kodama due to his own influence and reputation within the Japanese ultranationalist sphere, Meino's philosophy having been dictated heavily by writer Yukio Mishima, who had attempted to stage a coup during November 1970 which ultimately failed, the aftermath of which saw Mishima commit ritual suicide as per the ancient Bushido code. With the revelation that Kodama had been a recipient of American bribes in order to secure the Lockheed deals, Meino's admiration for him quickly turned to bitter resentment, and with Meino already struggling with mental health issues caused by 2 failed marriages and an attempted suicide, he set out to exact revenge on Kodama in a manner that honoured Japanese tradition. Thus, on the morning of March 23, 1976, Meino, who was a trained pilot, stepped aboard a Piper Cherokee light aircraft at Chofu Airport in western Tokyo while wearing the uniform of a Japanese kamikaze pilot, and proceeded towards Tokyo under the guise that he and his accomplices in another Cherokee were filming a private film about kamikaze pilots. However, at 9:50 a.m., Meino lunged the Cherokee downward and smashed it into the second floor of Kodama's sprawling mansion, leading to a large explosion and fire that gutted the upper floors of the building, though Kodama, who was in a different part of the house, remained unscathed, while his private security, comprised largely of Yakuza bodyguards, physically assaulted members of the press in an attempt to prevent them from reporting on the incident. As for Kodama himself, in the aftermath of the attack and the wider Lockheed scandal, his health rapidly deteriorated and he suffered a series of strokes, while his exposure as part of the bribery scheme saw his influence and reputation among both Japan's political classes and criminal underworld collapse by the end of the decade. Kodama would eventually see out the rest of his life in obscurity, increasingly paralyzed by multiple strokes, until he eventually passed away on January 17, 1984 in his sleep from complications of one final stroke at the age of 72, his reputation having been reduced to one of disgrace and his passing not mourned. In West Germany, Ernst Hauser testified before the US Senate Subcommittee, revealing that the company had paid bribes to European government officials to secure military contracts, with these allegations including a claim that Franz Josef Strauss, former West German defense minister, had received at least $10 million from Lockheed to facilitate West Germany's 1961 purchase of 900 F-104 Starfighters, though Strauss denied this and filed a slander lawsuit against Hauser. Strauss also denied the involvement of their relationship dating back to 1945, though evidence suggested otherwise, as Hauser had served as best man at Strauss's wedding, a detail that Strauss later dismissed as insignificant, while the Lockheed bribery scandal took on a far more personal implication in West Germany due to the significant loss of life caused by crashes related to the F-104G within the ranks of the Luftwaffe. Hauser's claims that the fatalities were, in part, a result of bribery and corruption within the Defense Ministry added another layer of controversy, and by early 1976, Chancellor Helmut Schmidt's government faced mounting pressure from within the Social Democratic Party, or SDP, to launch an investigation, while upcoming elections against Strauss's rival CDU meant Schmidt could deliver a potentially fatal blow to their electoral campaign. In May 1976, the Bundestag formally requested information from the Church Committee, with a delegation from the West German Ministry of Justice being sent to Washington to gather evidence, while at the same time, a report in the Frankfurter Rundschau alleged that individuals linked to Lockheed had received approximately $1.4 million in disguised commissions. Under increasing scrutiny, the Defense Ministry acknowledged that Lockheed's Geneva office and several civilian contractors had been recipients of such payments, and when questioned by the SDP faction in the Bundestag, officials claimed that they had only learned of the allegations in October 1975, when the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee relayed Hauser's testimony regarding payments to the CDU. Further controversy arose when Christian Steinrucker, a former Lockheed advisor, testified that he had received between $8,000 and $12,500 to pass on to the Defense Ministry in connection with an attempted sale of a Lockheed Jetstar, though the ministry denied any knowledge of these payments, while Strauss continued to reject all claims that he had received money from Lockheed, finally acknowledging his past association with Hauser, but portraying it as inconsequential. By September 1976, the Bundestag investigation revealed that payments had indeed been made, but they did not necessarily amount to legal bribery. And while the inquiry confirmed that Lockheed had developed extensive political connections in West Germany, there was no definitive proof that Strauss had personally received illicit funds, while documents relating to the F-104 purchase had been destroyed years prior due to a lack of storage space. In June 1977, following an 8-month inquiry, the Federal Ministry of Justice announced that no substantial proof had been found to confirm that Lockheed had bribed West German politicians or officials, thus ending the official investigation and removing the immediate political pressure on Strauss and the CDU, though the controversy surrounding the matter was still enough to cause the CDU to fail to secure a parliamentary majority in the 1976 Bundestag elections. Public interest in the case continued well into the late 1970s, with May 1978 seeing the Süddeutsche Zeitung leak a government summary of the investigation's findings, which confirmed that Lockheed had established significant influence within West Germany, securing connections with civilian government employees, military personnel, and multiple political parties. However, it also concluded that the payments made by Lockheed did not technically violate bribery laws, and thus Hauser's allegations regarding Strauss had been deemed demonstrably false, while investigators also found that key documents provided by Hauser, including a supposed letter from CIA Director Alan Dulles to Strauss acting as an intermediary for Lockheed, were forgeries. While Strauss never faced any criminal charges, his involvement with Lockheed led to further allegations that he had been bribed by other major firms, including BMW and Dornier, though these remained unproven. Strauss's divisive political career finally ending on October 1, 1988, when he collapsed while on a hunting trip in the forest near Regensburg, passing away 2 days later at the age of 73. In the Netherlands, the scandal erupted publicly when Ernst Hauser testified that Prince Bernhard had received at least $1.1 million in payments through Muser to facilitate the Netherlands' purchase of the F-104 Starfighter, with the then Prime Minister ordering a formal inquiry, despite Bernhard's denial of being involved in such a matter. The investigation quickly expanded beyond financial misconduct, as journalists uncovered details of Bernhard's past affiliations and personal indiscretions, with reports linking him to the Reiter SS, a mounted unit of the Nazi paramilitary organization, and revealing a string of extramarital affairs, including 2 illegitimate daughters, one from a mistress in Paris, and the other from a German pilot he had met in Mexico. In 1974, Bernhard had written directly to Lockheed, demanding commissions on Dutch government aircraft purchases. This letter, made public during the investigation, providing incontrovertible evidence of his involvement in improper financial dealings while serving as Inspector General of the Dutch Armed Forces. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the Dutch government refrained from prosecuting him when Queen Juliana threatened to abdicate, and in order to avoid a succession crisis, a political compromise was reached, wherein Bernhard was forced to resign from his military positions and step down from various corporate and charitable roles in exchange for not facing trial. On August 26, 1976, a full government report of the affair was released, revealing the extent to which Bernhard had engaged in financial misconduct, confirming that he had been willing to accept financial incentives in exchange for influencing defense contracts, thus leading to his removal as Inspector General of the Armed Forces and prohibited from wearing a military uniform in public. The Dutch States General voted against criminal prosecution, but he was required to relinquish his presidency of the World Wildlife Fund, which was subsequently handed over to Britain's Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. While Bernhard continued to deny the bribery allegations for the rest of his life, following his passing on December 1, 2004 at the age of 93, letters revealed that he had admitted to accepting a sweetener of $1 million from Lockheed, but had insisted that the funds had been directed towards the World Wildlife Fund rather than personal gain. In Italy, among the records examined by investigators was a coded reference to an Italian official identified as Antelope Cobbler, a term deciphered in Lockheed's internal documents as referring to an Italian prime minister, and while no specific individual was named, speculation immediately centered around Giovanni Leone, who had served as prime minister for part of the period in question and was, by 1976, president of Italy. In the wake of these revelations, the Italian magazine L'Espresso published a series of investigative reports that deepened the crisis, alleging that Leone, along with other senior officials, had been involved in the bribery scheme. These allegations also implicating former Prime Minister Mariano Ruma, former defense ministers Luigi Gui and Mario Tanassi, and General Giulio Fanali, the former Chief of Staff of the Italian Air Force. According to reports, Lockheed has secured contracts for the C-130 Hercules transport aircraft through the payment of illicit commissions, not only influencing Italy's decision to purchase the aircraft, but also artificially inflating the contract's price, leading to a substantial financial burden on Italian taxpayers, a crucial matter considering the state of Italy's then economic crisis. In May 1976, amid mounting public outrage, the Italian Parliament established a commission to investigate the Lockheed affair, with Lockheed representatives in the United States acknowledging that bribes had been paid to Italian political figures, though they stopped short of confirming whether any payments had gone directly to a sitting prime minister. Nonetheless, the scandal escalated, as media scrutiny and political pressure intensified, and Leone became the focal point of public anger, with opposition parties, particularly the Italian Communist Party, seizing the moment to demand accountability, while the Christian Democratic Party, Leone's own political faction, struggled to defend him as divisions widened within its ranks. By mid-1978, the pressure had become unsustainable, and Leone, facing relentless accusations and diminishing support within his own party, announced his resignation on June 15, 1978, 6 months before the scheduled end of his term, making him the first Italian president to step down in disgrace due to a scandal. While Leone's resignation marked the peak of the political fallout, the legal repercussions of the Lockheed affair extended far beyond him, with December 1976 seeing the culmination of a 9-month inquiry formally charged former Prime Minister Mariano Rumor and former Defense Ministers Luigi Gui and Mario Tanassi with corruption and fraud, the findings of the investigation concluding that financial inducements from Lockheed had compromised the integrity of Italy's defense procurement process, leading to inflated costs and undermining public trust in the government. By March 1979, the scandal reached a legal climax when Italy's constitutional court delivered its verdicts, with Mario Tanassi, who was still a member of parliament at the time, being sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison for accepting $1.6 million in Lockheed bribes, resulting in the revocation of his parliamentary seat and a 2.5-year ban from holding public office. General Giulio Fanali, who had played a pivotal role in negotiating the aircraft deal, received a sentence of 21 months, while Luigi Gui was acquitted due to lack of conclusive evidence linking him to the illicit payments, though the prosecution had originally sought much harsher penalties, recommending 9 years for Tanassi, 6 years for Gui, and 7 years for Fanali. In addition to the political figures implicated, 2 Italian lawyers, Ovidio and Antonio Lefebvre, were also found guilty, the brothers having acted as intermediaries for Lockheed's payments, using their connections to facilitate the bribery scheme, with Ovidio Lefebvre admitting in court that he had personally delivered a suitcase filled with cash to an aide of Tanassi in 1971 named Bruno Palmiotti, who himself was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for his role in distributing the illicit funds. Despite Leone's resignation, ambiguity over the true identity of Antelope Cobbler persisted, and the case remained the subject of political controversy, with some arguing that Leone had been unfairly targeted and that the accusations against him had been politically motivated rather than based on solid evidence. Leone himself continued to deny any involvement in the affair, and his defenders pointed out that no definitive proof had ever emerged linking him directly to the payments, though after his resignation, Leone remained active in the Italian Senate as a senator for life, and through his various writings, interviews and legal commentaries, consistently sought to vindicate himself, insisting on the correctness of his actions as president and the baselessness of the allegations against him. Over time, some of his most vocal critics publicly retracted their accusations, among them Marco Pannella and Emma Bonino, leaders of the Radical Party, who openly apologized to Leone on his 90th birthday, acknowledging that the campaign against him had been excessive and unjust, while on September 25, 2001, just weeks before his 93rd birthday, the Italian government formally bestowed upon him the title of President Emeritus of the Republic, a designation that would later apply to all former Italian presidents. Leone eventually passed away on November 9, 2001, at his home in Rome, while in 2006, President Giorgio Napolitano publicly stated that the Italian Senate had fully rehabilitated Leone's reputation, affirming that he had been unfairly accused and that the accusations against him had never been substantiated. Finally, in Saudi Arabia, congressional hearings exposed how Adnan Khashoggi and other intermediaries had orchestrated multi-million-dollar payments to ensure favorable contract awards, with his close ties to CIA operatives, including James H. Critchfield and Kim Roosevelt, ensuring that he remained a valuable asset in intelligence circles, while his relationship with American businessmen such as Bebe Rebozo, a close confidant of President Nixon, reinforced his access to the highest levels of political power. His reach was further underscored by his contributions of $200 million to Nixon's 1972 re-election campaign, a sum that was channeled through a friendly bank to circumvent U.S. laws prohibiting such large corporate donations, these financial maneuvers strengthening his influence within both Washington and Riyadh, solidifying his role as a key power broker between the West and the oil-rich Gulf states. By the height of his career, Khashoggi had amassed extraordinary wealth, which he used to build a business empire spanning 5 continents, with his company, the Triad International Holding Company, operating as a sprawling multinational conglomerate with investments in luxury hotels, shopping centers, banks, oil refineries, gold mines, and construction firms. Despite his immense wealth and influence, the Lockheed scandal marked the beginning of Khashoggi's decline, and by the late 1970s, the political climate in both the United States and Saudi Arabia had shifted, where in the wake of the bribery revelations, his growing notoriety and the attention drawn to his lavish lifestyle made it increasingly difficult for him to operate in the shadows. The Saudi royal family, once his patrons, began to distance themselves from him, concerned that his reputation for corruption could damage their own standing, and as scrutiny intensified, he found himself gradually edged out of the corridors of power that he had once navigated with ease. During the 1980s, his decline was further accelerated when his name surfaced in the Iran-Contra affair, in which the Reagan administration secretly facilitated arms sales to Iran and funneled the proceeds to Nicaraguan rebels, with Khashoggi once again playing the role of middleman and helped broker these transactions, further entrenching his image as a man who thrived in the murky world of covert operations and illicit arms deals. By the end of the decade, his legal troubles escalated dramatically, with 1988 seeing him arrested in Switzerland on charges of concealing funds linked to the collapse of the Bank of Credit and Commercial International, a banking institution that had become infamous for its role in laundering money for criminal enterprises and corrupt officials worldwide. Extradited to the United States, he faced charges of obstruction of justice and mail fraud, but was ultimately acquitted in 1990. But the prolonged legal battles drained his resources and further eroded his influence, while at the same time his holding company, Triad America, collapsed into bankruptcy, marking the disintegration of the financial empire he had spent decades building. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, his waning prominence meant he could no longer live the lavish playboy lifestyle to which he had become so long accustomed, and following a 2006 lawsuit against him by the Securities and Exchange Commission for securities fraud, this brought about a final end to his unparalleled extravagance, political access, and high-stakes deal-making. Khashoggi would spend his final years as a relic of a bygone era, a symbol of unrestrained wealth, excess, and global intrigue, the former arms dealer spending his last years in relative obscurity before passing away in London on June 6, 2017 at the age of 81 after suffering from Parkinson's disease. As for Lockheed itself, at the time of the scandal, the company was in the process of finalizing a $1.3 billion deal for the purchase of Lockheed P-3C Orions, but with the uncovery of the bribery scheme during early 1976, the Japanese government abandoned its purchase, severely damaging Lockheed's reputation in the country and casting doubt on American defense contractors more broadly. Furthermore, the scandal led to heightened scrutiny of U.S. arms sales and prompted Japan to explore greater domestic arms production while reconsidering export restrictions, while in Hong Kong, Bernard Smith, a senior executive at Cathay Pacific Airways, resigned after it was revealed that he had accepted an $80,000 payment from Lockheed to facilitate aircraft sales. In response to the growing scandal, Lockheed implemented corporate reforms to improve governance and prevent future violations, while government agencies such as the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission were given expanded authority to investigate foreign bribery cases, leading to stricter enforcement of anti-corruption laws. Despite these efforts, Lockheed faced further challenges, with the late 1980s seeing financier Harold Simmons attempt a hostile takeover, identifying the company's overfunded pension plan as a potential financial windfall, with Simmons seeking to install a new board that included former Texas Senator John Tower and Admiral Elmo Zumwalt Jr., but the takeover attempt ultimately failed due to concerns about Lockheed's financial stability and dependence on government contracts. In 1994, Lockheed and Martin Marietta began merger discussions, culminating in a $10 billion deal that formed Lockheed Martin. This merger, completed in 1995, creating the largest U.S. military contractor, with annual revenues of $23 billion and a workforce of 170,000 people, with the newly merged entity, headquartered in North Bethesda, Maryland, seeking to consolidate operations, reduce redundancies, and streamline defense procurement. However, concerns over competition and regulatory oversight remained, with Lockheed shareholders receiving a premium for their stock, and executives from both companies were awarded substantial bonuses, drawing criticism due to the government contracts that funded them. Financially, Lockheed Martin has grown significantly over the decades, with its revenue climbing from $37.2 billion in 2005 to $71 billion in 2024, with government contracts making up the bulk of its income, while the company's aeronautics division remains its largest revenue source, accounting for over 40% of total sales in 2023. To summarize, the Lockheed bribery scandals were a defining moment in the history of corporate corruption, exposing the intricate ties between defense contractors, political figures, and intermediaries operating behind the scenes of global commerce, revealing how Lockheed systematically used bribes to secure lucrative contracts, ultimately shattering political careers, eroding public trust, and prompting legal reforms. The Lockheed case, therefore, remains a cautionary tale about the need for stringent oversight, transparent governance, and ethical business practices, and serves as a reminder of how corruption thrived where oversight was weak, financial incentives overrode ethical considerations, and political systems allowed corporate interests to dictate policy, its lasting lesson being that transparency, accountability, and integrity are essential not just as ideals, but as necessary safeguards to ensure that business and politics serve the public good rather than private interests.